Hi everyone. Can you imagine enhancing your body and your mind to the point where you become superhuman? Transhumanism explores this mind-bending possibility where we surpass our biological limits through technology. Imagine integrating cybernetic enhancements into your body. How would these profound changes affect your experience of being human? And if you enhanced your brain and consciousness as well, what would that even feel like? Keep watching to learn more. This video has 3 parts: technology and humans, the notion of self, and expansion of consciousness. Part 1. Technology and humans. Let's start with a definition of transhumanism, not to be confused with transgender. Transhumanism is the study of technology that might enable us to go beyond current human limitations. As Max More puts it, transhumanists want to overcome the limits imposed by our biological and genetic heritage. Transhumanism is a heavily technology-oriented branch of philosophy, but it follows in the grand tradition of medicine to try to use our knowledge to improve the health and functioning of human bodies. Even though it's heavily futuristic, you could also see transhumanism as an extension of humanism. Humanists think that we should allow people to define meaning in their own lives, and that we should base our ethics on human experience. In other words, the human should be the center of all we think about and do. And sure, if taken to extremes, transhumanists probably want to eliminate pain, stop aging altogether, maybe even eliminate death, or at least grant everyone indefinite lifespans, so that except in the case of accidents, you can basically live forever. Because it talks about a lot of key struggles that people experience, portions of transhumanism often get co-opted into other contexts, like political discussions, for example. But at its core, the idea is not religious, not political, based on science and trust in progress. That's not to say that transhumanism is going to solve all the world's problems, but we'll get back to that more in a bit. Different from an android or robot, a cyborg is someone who's part biological and part artificial. They're people that blur the line between human and machine. The simplest type of cyborg is someone who adds technology to their body, usually because they're trying to replace something that isn't working anymore, get rid of a disability or a failing organ or something like that. And while people with a pacemaker or even people that wear glasses might not think of themselves as cyborgs, they technically fit the definition. Join the cyborg side. We have compute and even a manifesto. Anyway, as someone replaces more and more parts of their body with artificial components, you might stop calling them a cyborg and start calling them a posthuman. Posthuman is someone who evolved from a human but is now so far from the original that maybe they deserve a different word. Taken to an even further extreme, you might imagine a person transitioning to a fully digital existence. And the process of becoming that particular kind of posthuman is often called mind upload. I made another video about mind uploading if you'd like to check it out over here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of this video. I touched on this earlier, but what exactly is a technology? Are glasses a form of technology that actually makes me a cyborg because I'm using them to enhance my vision? The answer is yes, they count as technology. In fact, pretty much everything that people invent counts as technology. For example, a drug is an edible technology that you can use to transform an aspect of your body. Even language and fire, which were 2 key developments in the history of humanity, could be considered to be technology. And they actually both predate humans, or they predate Homo sapiens anyways. So in a sense, we've always been technologically augmented. That might be a bit of a stretch, but it really is a continuum from a completely unaugmented human to someone who is relying on technology for many aspects of their existence. If you step into a modern day pharmacy, for example, and look around really carefully, you might be astonished at the wide range of drugs and serums and gadgets that we humans have invented to help take care of our bodies. And of course, there's my favorite example, which is the smartphone. Many of us that have a smartphone become dependent on it for the smallest of tasks, whether it's navigating from point A to point B in the city that we call home, keeping track of our time, using it as a kind of external memory storage for taking notes, or using it as the primary communication mechanism that we have to talk to friends and family members. So the definition of technology is broad, and the definition of cyborg can also be as broad as you would like it to be. But wrapped up with technology is this idea of progress. The idea that as we invent more and more technology, our civilization as a whole advances and becomes better off. For those of us in the Western world, especially if you work in technology, it can be easy to lose sight of the fact that this value of progress is not actually a universal value. And in fact, it's not even a universal good. You can have a society that's advancing, that's experiencing progress in terms of drug development or what have you, but that as a whole is experiencing a degradation in the standard of living for all of its citizens. You actually have that in parts of the US and the UK right now, where especially poorer regions are experiencing a decline in life expectancy, which is one of the key reasons behind all of the political and ideological misalignments that have come in those two countries over the past couple of years. Not everybody values this idea of progress anymore, because they've seen that it doesn't actually work for them. Nevertheless, transhumanism is inherently optimistic. It believes that this idea of progress is still going to lead to incredible medical advancements that are going to enable us to expand the abilities of our bodies. But you can't look at transhumanism in a vacuum, all on its own, because who's going to get access to those life-changing technologies? Well, given the world that we live in, at first it's going to be those that are really wealthy and have connections. So it will only increase the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So to solve the problems of the world, you still have to look at things from multiple perspectives, from economic to social. Nevertheless, it's very fun to think about the possibilities of transhumanism. Just don't get too carried away. Here's a fun quote by Max Moore. "We have achieved 2 of the 3 alchemists' dreams. We have transmuted the elements and learned to fly. Immortality is next." And if that's your thing, you might want to check out this previous video I made about anti-aging technologies. But back to the topic at hand. Part 2, the notion of self. So when we've invented this super new whiz-bang, crazy bionic arm technology and people start using it, how will that impact their sense of self? Will they still feel fully human? Will they feel disconnected from who they used to be? There seems to be something deeply unsettling about replacing aspects of yourself, especially when we're talking about augmentations for the brain. So let's dive into it. The first thing to know about technologies is that really good technologies actually fade into the background. If it's designed well, you almost forget that the technology is there, working for you. Especially when we're talking about technologies that are designed to be used by the human body, your brain will actually dedicate some neurons to figuring out how to operate that technology. It basically gets hard-coded into a small part of your brain so that your conscious effort doesn't have to focus on it anymore. It's like developing muscle memory for using an object. The technology becomes a tool, and your conscious focus starts to go on the problem you're trying to solve. You don't think about the details of that tool use. For example, think about using a fork or chopsticks to eat. Unless you're just learning how to use chopsticks or something, you probably don't think very much about how you will actually use that utensil to consume the food. You're thinking more about, do I want to eat this next? Or am I getting full? Or do I want dessert? Or whatever. Similarly, if you know how to use a hammer, very similar thing. You don't think about the hammer, you think about the nail. There's a lot of truth in the saying that when you have a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. Or think about driving a car or riding a motorbike or a bicycle. Once you have some amount of experience at operating them, you start to think about the route and your destination and what you want to do when you get there, not how to operate the machine itself. And if you're on a familiar path, your conscious mind can wander entirely and you can drive to work on autopilot, even when you meant to be going to the grocery store or something. And my last example is using a computer keyboard to type. Once you've learned touch typing, or once you've given up on learning touch typing and have just learned a way to type that works for you, then you usually don't think about the keys anymore. You don't look at the keyboard, you think about the document you're writing or the web page you're interacting with. There's an exception here though, which is that the technology comes back into the foreground if it's not working properly. For example, for me, because of the health conditions that I have with my hands, I can't type on a computer keyboard without a lot of pain. So for me, using a computer keyboard is a very conscious experience. Every character I press, I think, is this worth it? Is the amount of effort I'm putting into this and the subsequent pain that's going to come from it actually worth what I'm trying to achieve? When I'm writing a Google Doc, for example, I will usually have it open on my phone and my computer, and I will sometimes type, sometimes use voice recognition on the phone, sometimes use the stylus to move around on the phone. I'm constantly thinking about what will be the least effort way to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. There's no one solution that works all the time for me. And yet, once I did that for a while, that composite solution of using 2 or 3 different things all the time also recedes into the background. And now, if I'm writing a YouTube script, I'm just doing that without thinking about it. Someone watching me would probably ask, why do you keep switching back and forth? And why did you use the trackball in that place instead of the stylus? And my answer would be, I don't know. I was just focusing on writing the script. So our notion of technologies and our notion of what recedes into the background is pretty flexible. And in fact, even our notion of ourselves is very flexible. For example, When we wear a hat, our perception of ourself grows. We duck before entering a low door. We angle our face into the sun, knowing that it won't bother our eyes. If you're wearing a backpack and you get on a busy train, you don't even really think about it, but the backpack is part of your perception of the self. You know that it will take up space for you to stand on the train with the backpack, so you make sure to accommodate that, or maybe you take off the backpack if it's really crowded. Or think about using a hammer or a badminton racket. Your proprioception actually expands, and you can feel that this is almost a part of your body, and that's what lets you accurately hit a nail on the head most of the time, or accurately return a badminton shot. If you're driving a car, your notion of how big you are expands, and you can kind of think, am I going to fit through that tunnel or under that bridge? Or at least in theory. I don't have a driver's license, so it's all theory for me. I read another example of a wheelchair user who said that when one of the two back wheels of his wheelchair would be on a bump of some sort, for example, it would raise up the chair and make it unstable, and he would feel shocked, like something was wrong with his body. And if someone were to try to touch the wheelchair, it felt like someone was touching his own body. There's even some scientific evidence for this expansion of proprioception. When a monkey has to use a rake to reach some food, the neurons in its brain that fire when something is near the end of the rake are the same neurons that fire when something is near the monkey's hand. That example, as well as many of the others that I've used in this video, are from a video titled Transhumanism, the World's Most Dangerous Idea by PhilosophyTube. I'd really like to thank them for putting together a wonderful video, and if you'd like a more in-depth look at some of these topics, check it out as the first link in the description below. So connecting this back to cyborgs and transhumans, I think that yourself is whatever is necessary for your continued existence that is also attached to your body, or basically attached to your body, like a smartphone. Even if those components are much larger than your original body, even if those components are artificial, even if those objects do things that your original body wasn't capable of and had no connection with, all these things get incorporated into our self, into our sense of proprioception very readily. Just think about the last time you hurt your finger and had to put a bandage on it, and then went around your day-to-day tasks using all your fingers except that one. Within a short period of time, your proprioception adapts and you automatically start using your motor control in a way that doesn't need that finger. That's an example of subtraction. Well, addition is basically the same thing. By the way, I saw in a TED Talk once a funny idea. The speaker said, if you don't believe that the smartphone is part of your body, then hand your smartphone to the person next to you and take theirs and hold on to it for a few minutes. He had the audience do that, and then everybody got very uncomfortable and started laughing nervously. It doesn't matter. We're all cyborgs. Just embrace it. Part 3. Expansion of consciousness. It's all well and good to talk about getting a new bionic arm, but transhumanism also encompasses enhancements to your brain or to your cognition. There are a lot of these types of things, but the simplest to imagine is a good brain-computer interface that lets your brain talk directly to a computer. Your brain wouldn't have to be necessarily modified in any way to make this happen, but your brain could start relying on the computer for a lot of things. For example, as a sort of 100% reliable external storage mechanism, or as a great way to do formal reasoning, or even just as a fast way to double-check that there are no flaws in some argument that you've put together in your head. There are lots of other ways of achieving mental augmentation, however, and I'll refer you to some of the links in my description below, including a book that was edited by Max Moore. So anyway, transhumanism means we could have physical, mental, psychological, all kinds of different augmentations that would expand the possibilities and expand our sense of self. The real question, though, is what would that feel like? Let's start with physical enhancements. Obviously, it might feel like recovering from an illness very rapidly and being able to use your body again in the way that you remember. Or it might feel like gaining access to a sixth sense, a kind of new stimulation on your nerves that you can't make sense of, but eventually ends up resolving into something useful. Remember that when people have a stroke and part of their brain ends up no longer working right, thanks to neuroplasticity, another part of their brain can step in and learn to interpret those signals and produce those outputs. So someone can learn to walk again, or talk again, or eat, or even complex motor skills like skiing. So getting a new physical augmentation that gives you a new sense or a new ability might be something like that. It would probably be more difficult for an adult to learn than a younger person, but given enough time, the neuroplasticity might make it possible. The interesting part, though, is what would a mental augmentation feel like? Maybe like having a direct line to a very smart friend that can answer your questions within the space of your own head. Maybe like being able to talk to yourself 5 years in the future and receive very pertinent advice. Maybe like never forgetting a word or remembering something after seeing it just once. Maybe even like constant deja vu when you're trying to learn something new because some of the context is being fed into your biological brain from all of the augments. Maybe like seeing amusing synergies in all the little things that are happening around you because you're able to process more data and see more connections. I think it might be a lot like the difference between being pretty sleepy and being very alert. You just feel more capable and confident, and you solve problems better and faster. You don't really know how it works. You just get into the groove and then things start clicking. In terms of psychological changes, you might be able to experience pleasure in a lot more things. Maybe there's no unneeded pain if it's something that you or your body is already dealing with, because that's really the evolutionary intent of pain. It's to tell you, stop doing this, or you need to address this, or something is wrong with your body. But if parts of your body are artificial and they're repairing themselves, or if your proprioception is enhanced enough to make sure you'll never bend your finger in the way that makes it get sprained, then maybe pain isn't really necessary. It's being taken care of. And certainly, I think people that struggle with things like confidence, or lack of experience, or negative feelings like depression, probably a lot of those could be dealt with, either through a lot of training and communication between your brain and the augments, or simple support and adjustment that's much more fine-grained than what you can achieve with a sledgehammer chemical right now. I think it's interesting as well to think about the amount of telepathy that might be going on. Can you directly communicate with others, not just words, not just ideas, but also emotions or memories or past thoughts? Certainly it would be higher bandwidth, so it's just a matter of converting the representations from one person's brain to another. And if you have it all hooked up to a supercomputer, that seems pretty possible, doesn't it? Anyway, that's definitely another video. When touching on the psychological aspects of mind augmentation, Nick Bostrom wrote an article called Letter from Utopia. The letter is a fictional account of how a transhuman might try to communicate to the humans of today what their life is like. And here's a quote. "You could say that I feel surpassing bliss, but these are words invented to describe human experience. What I feel is as far beyond human feelings as my thoughts are beyond human thought. I wish I could show you what I have in mind." And another quote, "I have experienced human life in many forms and places, jungle and desert and crackling Arctic ice, slum and palace and office, etc., and the empty home with long afternoons. Prioritization, scheduling, time management, all these things are really important. You can't do all the things that you want to do." And it's a very interesting thought that a posthuman might actually have the time or the processing power or whatever to explore all these different avenues. They might not necessarily have to choose in the way that we do. And I don't know if that entity would be human anymore, but I do think it would still be a pretty desirable existence. Anyway, definitely check out The Letter from Utopia in the links below if you'd like to try putting yourself in the place of a posthuman. I want to address one other point, which is if you start replacing parts of yourself, are you actually the same person at the end of it? This is the philosophical example of the ship of Theseus, which was basically a ship where every piece of wood, every part was replaced by a new part. And the question is that still the same ship? In other words, if you replace every part of your body, are you still the same person? An extreme version of this is mind uploading, right? Transitioning your mind from running on a biological substrate to running on a digital substrate. I made a video on mind uploading in the past, which you can check out here, and a lot of the comments on that video were people saying, you're just making a copy of yourself. If you scan your brain and start running it in software, you won't subjectively experience living on, which is probably true if there's a disconnect between yourself and that new biological entity. You'll wake up like all the people in Bobiverse, suddenly finding yourself in a new body while thinking, hey, wait, I thought I was the original person. Definitely check out that book, by the way, the Bobiverse series, if you like science fiction. However, it is at least possible to transform the brain neuron by neuron, taking each biological neuron and exchanging it for an artificial neuron. Or, for example, running a digital copy of your brain in sync so that all the neurons are actually exchanging information back and forth synchronously, so that you will experience being in both places at the same time before then shutting off the biological portion. All this is theoretical, of course. We have no idea if such tech is feasible, but it does mean that it's still relevant to ask the question, what would it feel like to expand your consciousness in this way? Finally, in conclusion, we talked about transhumanism, how it's a technological philosophy that depends on this idea of progress to enable us to go beyond current human biological limitations. We talked about different terms that people use for those engaging in aspects of replacing or upgrading their bodies, cyborg being the main one, which is a person that started out biological and started adding artificial components. Then we started talking about technology and how it fades into the background if it's designed well, because your brain just just dedicate some neurons to figuring it out, and then your consciousness can focus on other things. Technology can be incorporated into our sense of self because the technology fades into the background, gets added to our sense of proprioception, and then we're walking and talking, running around as a cyborg. So next time you put on a giant hat, an unwieldy backpack, or acrylic nails, think about all the work that your proprioception and your brain's motor control is doing to make sure you can still carry out the tasks you would like to do without bumping into everything. Yes, putting on this hat makes me a cyborg. This is my cyborg hat. It comes from the Cylon wardrobe. It's designed to make me look human. Then we tried to answer the question, what would it actually feel like to get cyborg augmentations? Both physical augmentations, like a new arm, and mental augmentations, like better memory or better communication abilities with other people. It's hard to think about, but I do believe that it would be a continuous transformation process. The same way that being a cyborg is a big sliding scale, we would gradually feel a little bit different as we incorporate each new change. And we would probably still call ourselves human, or maybe posthuman eventually, because the brain is so good at incorporating new things into our sense of self. If you want to do a deep dive into more transhumanist philosophy, definitely check out the links in the description below. There's some really good ones there. And of course, if you liked this video, check out this previous one I made about longevity and anti-aging research, which depending on how you look at it, could just be medicine or could really be transhumanist thinking. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.